While I was cooking in the kitchen, my mother-in-law walked in, turned off the stove, and screamed, "Go to your room right now. Don't touch anything in this house. Everything belongs to me now. You have no rights here." I said nothing. I went into the bedroom, took my car keys, and left the house. The next morning, a mysterious man in a neat black suit knocked on the door. My mother-in-law immediately went hysterical right after the man uttered a single sentence that changed everything. But before the story begins, please write in the comments where you're watching this story from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so Midnight Tales channel can continue to grow and bring you even more thrilling stories. The rich aroma of beef broth filled the spacious, spotless kitchen. Steam rose gently from a thick aluminum pot simmering on the stove. Deanna stood there, stirring the soup slowly, tenderly. It was Ryan's favorite recipe, her late husband's. It had been 40 days since Ryan passed away suddenly from illness. Cooking his favorite food was the only way Deanna could ease the aching longing crushing her chest. The woman, wearing a simple shawl, stared blankly into the swirling broth. Her mind drifted to memories of Ryan hugging her from behind every time she cooked this dish. The large house felt unbearably silent without his laughter, leaving behind an emptiness that slowly became suffocating. The calm shattered abruptly. Heavy footsteps slammed toward the kitchen from the living room. Before Deanna could turn around, Mrs. Turner, her mother-in-law, stood in the doorway, her face flushed with restrained rage. Without warning, the middle-aged woman lunged forward and violently twisted the stove knob, killing the flame instantly. The still-hot pot shook, spilling some soup that hissed as it hit the burning metal. Deanna gasped in shock, instinctively pulling the ladle away to avoid splashing her mother-in-law. Her eyes widened in confusion. Before she could speak, Mrs. Turner's voice exploded through the room. "Go to your room right now. Don't touch anything in this house. Everything belongs to me now. You have no rights here." The words flew out sharp and fast, as if rehearsed for a long time, waiting for the perfect moment. Mrs. Turner's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her eyes burned with undisguised hatred. As long as Ryan was alive, that hatred had only appeared as subtle insults or cold stares. But today, the mask was completely gone. Deanna stood frozen. She didn't cry. She didn't argue or beg. Her calm yet firm gaze met her mother-in-law's eyes directly. In that brief, suffocating silence, Deanna saw it clearly: raw greed. She understood then. This wasn't grief over losing a son. It was a declaration of ownership. Mrs. Turner believed with Ryan's death, the house, assets, and wealth automatically became hers, and Deanna was nothing more than a disposable outsider. Without a word, Deanna gently placed the ladle on the marble counter. The metallic clink echoed sharply in the silence. She removed her apron, folded it neatly, and set it beside the stove. Her composed movements unsettled Mrs. Turner, who had expected tears or hysteria. Deanna turned around and walked past her mother-in-law as if the old woman didn't exist. Her steps were steady as she entered the master bedroom she once shared with Ryan. She didn't pack a suitcase. She knew Mrs. Turner would search it. Instead, she took a medium-sized handbag from the closet. From the bedside drawer, she retrieved her wallet, phone, and car keys. Then she knelt slightly and felt underneath the drawer. Her fingers pulled out a thick brown envelope taped discreetly beneath it. She slipped it quickly into her handbag. Standing up, Deanna looked around the room one last time. Her eyes lingered on their wedding photo hanging on the wall, silently saying goodbye to the memories. She walked out with her head held high. In the living room, Mrs. Turner stood watching suspiciously, making sure Deanna wasn't taking anything valuable. Deanna headed straight for the front door. As her hand touched the doorknob, Mrs. Turner sneered behind her. "Leave and never come back, you parasite. You think you can live in luxury forever off my son's hard work? Know your place now." Deanna paused, took a deep breath to calm the storm in her chest, then opened the door and walked out without replying. The afternoon air brushed against her face as she headed to the garage. She pressed the key fob. The sedan's lights blinked twice. The engine purred smoothly as she drove away from the mansion. In the rearview mirror, she saw Mrs. Turner standing in the doorway with a wide, victorious smile, as if she had just won a great war. Deanna looked forward again, driving through the quiet residential streets. Once she was safely out of sight, she pulled over beneath a shady tree. She took out her phone, selected a contact, and pressed call. After a few rings, a deep male voice answered. Deanna spoke calmly, coldly, nothing like the obedient daughter-in-law she had just been. "Execute Plan B. Mrs. Turner has crossed the line. I have the documents. Shut down all additional—" While I was cooking in the kitchen, my mother-in-law walked in, turned off the stove, and screamed, "Go to your room right now. Don't touch anything in this house. Everything belongs to me now. You have no rights here." I said nothing. I went into the bedroom, took my car keys, and left the house. The next morning, a mysterious man in a neat black suit knocked on the door. My mother-in-law immediately went hysterical right after the man uttered a single sentence that changed everything. But before the story begins, please write in the comments where you're watching this story from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so Midnight Tales channel can continue to grow and bring you even more thrilling stories. The rich aroma of beef broth filled the spacious, spotless kitchen. Steam rose gently from a thick aluminum pot simmering on the stove. Deanna stood there, stirring the soup slowly, tenderly. It was Ryan's favorite recipe, her late husband's. It had been 40 days since Ryan passed away suddenly from illness. Cooking his favorite food was the only way Deanna could ease the aching longing crushing her chest. The woman, wearing a simple shawl, stared blankly into the swirling broth. Her mind drifted to memories of Ryan hugging her from behind every time she cooked this dish. The large house felt unbearably silent without his laughter, leaving behind an emptiness that slowly became suffocating. The calm shattered abruptly. Heavy footsteps slammed toward the kitchen from the living room. Before Deanna could turn around, Mrs. Turner, her mother-in-law, stood in the doorway, her face flushed with restrained rage. Without warning, the middle-aged woman lunged forward and violently twisted the stove knob, killing the flame instantly. The still-hot pot shook, spilling some soup that hissed as it hit the burning metal. Deanna gasped in shock, instinctively pulling the ladle away to avoid splashing her mother-in-law. Her eyes widened in confusion. Before she could speak, Mrs. Turner's voice exploded through the room. "Go to your room right now. Don't touch anything in this house. Everything belongs to me now. You have no rights here." The words flew out sharp and fast, as if rehearsed for a long time, waiting for the perfect moment. Mrs. Turner's chest rose and fell rapidly. Her eyes burned with undisguised hatred. As long as Ryan was alive, that hatred had only appeared as subtle insults or cold stares. But today, the mask was completely gone. Deanna stood frozen. She didn't cry. She didn't argue or beg. Her calm yet firm gaze met her mother-in-law's eyes directly. In that brief, suffocating silence, Deanna saw it clearly: raw greed. She understood then. This wasn't grief over losing a son. It was a declaration of ownership. Mrs. Turner believed with Ryan's death, the house, assets, and wealth automatically became hers, and Deanna was nothing more than a disposable outsider. Without a word, Deanna gently placed the ladle on the marble counter. The metallic clink echoed sharply in the silence. She removed her apron, folded it neatly, and set it beside the stove. Her composed movements unsettled Mrs. Turner, who had expected tears or hysteria. Deanna turned around and walked past her mother-in-law as if the old woman didn't exist. Her steps were steady as she entered the master bedroom she once shared with Ryan. She didn't pack a suitcase. She knew Mrs. Turner would search it. Instead, she took a medium-sized handbag from the closet. From the bedside drawer, she retrieved her wallet, phone, and car keys. Then she knelt slightly and felt underneath the drawer. Her fingers pulled out a thick brown envelope taped discreetly beneath it. She slipped it quickly into her handbag. Standing up, Deanna looked around the room one last time. Her eyes lingered on their wedding photo hanging on the wall, silently saying goodbye to the memories. She walked out with her head held high. In the living room, Mrs. Turner stood watching suspiciously, making sure Deanna wasn't taking anything valuable. Deanna headed straight for the front door. As her hand touched the doorknob, Bella squealed with excitement and called out to her mother. The two of them rushed toward the safe and tried to open it together. Mrs. Turner entered Ryan's date of birth. Wrong. She tried her own birthday. Still wrong. She even tried Ryan's wedding date. The indicator light on the safe remained red. Invalid code. Bella snorted in frustration and kicked the leg of the desk hard. She complained that tomorrow they should call a locksmith or a safe specialist to force it open. Mrs. Turner waved it off, calming her daughter. Whatever's inside isn't going anywhere. This house is ours now. We have all the time in the world. They returned to the living room and sprawled on the soft leather sofa, their legs casually resting on the coffee table. The sense of power made them lose all restraint. Mrs. Turner began fantasizing about renovating the front garden and buying Bella a brand new car to replace the beat-up motorcycle her daughter had been riding for years. Afternoon faded into night, and the two of them drowned happily in their euphoria. Bella even started taking photos of the luxurious corners of the house and posting them on social media, hinting in the captions that this was her new home. Compliments from her friends poured in, inflating her ego even further. They didn't notice the sky outside growing dark, nor the strong winds picking up, almost as if nature itself was sending a warning. They also didn't realize that the house's Wi-Fi connection suddenly went completely dead at exactly 9 p.m., causing Bella to complain loudly because she could no longer update her social media. Mrs. Turner tried turning on the cable television for entertainment, but the screen only displayed a message, "No signal, subscription suspended." She assumed it was just a technical issue caused by bad weather or a late payment that could be handled tomorrow. Without the slightest suspicion, they decided to go to bed early. Bella slept in the master bedroom, sprawled across the plush king bed that once belonged to Deanna, while Mrs. Turner retired to an equally luxurious guest room. As they slept deeply, dreams of wealth and luxury danced through their minds, lulling them into a false sense of triumph. They had no idea this would be the last night they would ever sleep peacefully in that house. Miles away, inside a 5-star hotel room, Deanna sat in front of her laptop, monitoring banking movements and asset transfers. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, sending out decisive instructions, commands that would permanently alter Mrs. Turner's and Bella's fate the next morning. A faint smile appeared on Deanna's lips. It wasn't a smile of joy, but the bitter smile of a woman forced to teach a harsh lesson to those who were supposed to be her family. The wheel of fate was turning, and by morning its axis would strike straight at the heart of Mrs. Turner's arrogance. The next morning, the sun shone brightly, yet the air on the terrace of the mansion felt refreshingly cool to Mrs. Turner. She sat comfortably in an imported rattan chair on the porch, sipping warm tea from an expensive porcelain cup, one she knew cost a small fortune. She felt like a queen basking in her reign. A satisfied smile spread across her face as she admired the vast, well-manicured front yard. In her mind, she had already mapped out grand plans. She would sell Diana's sedan parked in the garage and use the money to take Bella on an overseas vacation. She even planned to call a real estate agent to appraise the house, just to satisfy her curiosity about how wealthy she had become. Her peaceful morning was interrupted by the low, powerful hum of an approaching engine. Mrs. Turner set down her cup and squinted toward the gate. A long, sleek, glossy black luxury sedan stopped precisely at the entrance. Her spine straightened instantly. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with excitement. She assumed it was one of her late son's wealthy associates, or perhaps a potential buyer who had heard rumors the house was on sale. Confidently, Mrs. Turner stood up and adjusted her clothes, preparing to greet the guest with the arrogance of the grand lady of the house. The rear door of the car opened. A tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, polished leather shoes, and holding a leather briefcase in his right hand, stepped out. His face was stiff, serious, and completely devoid of a smile. The man, Harry, walked toward the gate and opened it effortlessly, as if he had full access. Mrs. Turner was briefly startled seeing a stranger open her gate so easily, but she dismissed her suspicion and maintained her hostile expression. Harry walked calmly up the path toward the terrace. When he stopped in front of her, he didn't offer a handshake, he didn't exchange pleasantries. His gaze was direct and piercing, locking onto Mrs. Turner's eyes. She felt intimidated by the cold aura radiating from him, but her pride refused to show it. With a sharp tone, she demanded to know who he was and why he dared to disturb her morning. She expected him to bow politely. Instead, Harry calmly opened his briefcase, pulled out a document, and glanced briefly at his expensive watch. Then, in a deep, firm baritone that echoed across the silent terrace, he spoke, addressing Mrs. Turner by her full name, without honorifics. The next sentence struck her like lightning in day broadlight. Harry informed her that she and anyone currently inside the house had exactly 30 minutes to pack their personal belongings. He stated clearly that the legal owner of the property demanded the keys back immediately, and the house must be vacated of illegal occupants. Mrs. Turner stared at him in disbelief. Her blood boiled instantly. She burst into loud, forced laughter, an emotional, hysterical laughter, as if she had just heard the most ridiculous joke in the world. Hands on her hips, she shouted in Harry's face, accusing him of being at the wrong address or completely insane. She loudly proclaimed that she was the rightful owner of the house now. She was Ryan's biological mother, and Ryan was dead. Therefore, by inheritance law, all of her son's assets belonged to her. Her trembling finger pointed at Harry's face, and she threatened to call the residential security to have him thrown out. Harry didn't flinch. His expression remained as solid as stone, while Mrs. Turner unleashed her insults and baseless claims. When she finally ran out of breath, Harry spoke again, still calm, still cold. This time, his words were far more devastating. He explained that Mrs. Turner's assumption was a fatal mistake. Ryan lived in the house, yes, but he never owned it. Ryan had never held the legal title to the land or the building. Therefore, Ryan's death did not transfer ownership to the property to her. Mrs. Turner's face drained of color. Her legs nearly gave out.
Still, she forced herself to stand upright, her mind racing. If Ryan wasn't the owner, then who was? Had Ryan been renting the house? Impossible, she thought. Ryan always said this was his home. Panic crept in, but her arrogance refused to collapse. She accused Harry of lying, claiming he was trying to scam her out of her son's assets. The commotion on the terrace reached inside the house. It woke Bella, who stumbled out the front door, hair messy, eyes half open, staring confusedly at her mother confronting a man in a suit. Her presence only escalated the chaos. Without understanding the situation, Bella immediately jumped to her mother's defense, shrieking at Harry and demanding to know who he was to dare upset her mother. She even threatened to throw her shoe at him if he didn't leave immediately. Harry merely glanced at Bella with a look of disdain, as if she were a small, irritating insect. He ignored her entirely and turned back to Mrs. Turner. Harry extended his hand, offering a thick folder. Inside were official copies of the legitimate property ownership certificate. Mrs. Turner snatched the folder roughly. Her hands trembled violently as she flipped through the pages. Her breath caught when her eyes landed on the owner's name. Printed clearly and unmistakably was Deanna's full legal name, not Ryan's. What shocked her even more was the issuance date. The house had been fully purchased 3 years before Deanna and Ryan were married. The world spun around her. This single fact shattered everything she had believed, that Deanna was merely a lucky woman who married her successful husband. Seeing the shock on her face, Harry continued, revealing the truth long hidden by Deanna and the late Ryan. Deanna, he explained.
A wave of shame and fear crept through her body, replacing the drowsiness that still lingered moments ago. Before they could recover from the shock, another sedan entered the driveway. This time, the car stopped directly behind Harry's vehicle. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. It was Deanna. But Deanna looked nothing like the woman they had thrown out the day before. Gone were the loosed house dress and the bare, makeup-free face. Deanna now wore an elegant, tailored business blazer that fit her perfectly. A neatly styled shawl framed her face in a modern fashion. Dark sunglasses covered her eyes. Then she slowly removed them. An unmistakable aura of authority radiated from her presence, forcing Mrs. Turner and Bella to instinctively step back. Deanna walked forward, the rhythmic clicking of her high heels echoing sharply against the tiled floor. She stopped beside Harry and stared straight at her former mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Her gaze was cold, utterly devoid of the warmth she once showed them. She didn't greet them. She went straight to the point. Her voice was calm, controlled, yet carried a power that made Bella's skin crawl. Deanna asked whether her lawyer's explanation had been clear enough, or if they needed more time to reread the documents that were already painfully explicit. The question sounded more like an order than an offer. Mrs. Turner opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to deny everything, perhaps to defend herself, but no words came out. They stuck in her throat. She was staring at a stranger. The woman standing before her was not a submissive daughter-in-law she could scream at in the kitchen. This was a corporate leader, a formidable career woman. Deanna continued, calmly reminding Mrs. Turner of the words she screamed the previous afternoon about who had rights in this house. Now, Deanna said coolly, is the time to prove who truly owns those rights. A suffocating silence fell over the terrace. Bella nudged her mother anxiously, signaling her to do something, anything. But Mrs. Turner remained frozen, her ego shattered by reality. Deanna turned slightly toward Harry and gave a small nod. Harry then pulled another document from his briefcase. This time, it wasn't a property certificate, it was a will. Harry announced that before they were removed from the house, there was one more thing they needed to hear, a final message from Ryan kept at the notary's office. A message written specifically to protect his wife from the greed of his own family. Deanna looked at Mrs. Turner with an expression difficult to decipher, a mixture of pity and an unshakable resolve. The grand terrace fell eerily silent, as if the air itself had frozen. Standing tall and professional, Harry broke the seal of a brown envelope he had just taken from his briefcase. The tearing sound of paper rang loudly in Mrs. Turner and Bella's ears, signaling the beginning of a chapter that would crush their hopes to the core. Mrs. Turner stared at the envelope blankly. Her heart pounded, filled with fear and denial. She couldn't believe her own son would leave behind something that cornered her like this. In her mind, Ryan had always been obedient, devoted, a son who would give everything to his mother. But the cold expression on Diana's face and Harry's firm demeanor suggested otherwise. Harry removed an official notarized document bearing a hologram seal and began reading aloud in a clear, authoritative voice. Each word struck like a judge's gavel in a courtroom. He read the introduction of the will, stating that Ryan had written it while fully conscious, healthy, and under no coercion. Ryan expressed his deep love for his wife, Deanna, and his respect for his mother, Mrs. Turner. But the next lines made Mrs. Turner's face stiffen. Ryan wrote that he knew his mother's character well. He acknowledged her tendency to dominate and her frequent unfair treatment of Deanna, despite Diana's constant patience. Therefore, Ryan felt compelled to leave written protection for his beloved wife should he pass away first. Harry then moved to the most crucial part of the will, Clause 9, reading it slowly and emphatically to avoid any misunderstanding. The clause stated that Mrs. Turner was allowed to live in Diana's house and would receive a substantial monthly allowance from Ryan's personal investments on one absolute condition. Mrs. Turner must treat Diana with kindness, respect, and as family. If it was proven that Mrs. Turner intimidated Diana, verbally abused her, or attempted to expel her from the house, then all financial support would be revoked immediately and permanently. Additionally, every facility and access Ryan had provided during his lifetime would be terminated at the exact moment the violation occurred. Mrs. Turner's knees buckled. She nearly collapsed, barely managing to cling to one of the terrace pillars. Her face turned deathly pale, as if all the blood had drained from her body. Her mind raced back to the previous afternoon, to the moment she proudly shut off the stove and screamed at Diana in the kitchen. Every harsh word, every insult now came crashing back like a lethal boomerang. Only now did she realize she had violated the one and only condition her son had set. Not only had she lost the mansion, but also the monthly income that financed her lifestyle and Bella's. Everything vanished in a single moment. Regret crept in, not because she felt remorse for mistreating Diana, but because she had acted recklessly and caused financial ruin for herself. Beside her, Bella stood frozen, her mouth tightly shut. The loud, fearless girl had shrunk into silence, imagining a life without allowance, without luxury, forced to return to hardship. Bella shot her mother a blaming look, silently asking her why she had been so emotional the day before. But she dared not speak in front of Diana, who now stood in absolute authority. Diana remained calm beside her lawyer, her face neutral, no excessive triumph. For her, this wasn't a joyful victory. It was a necessary step to reclaim her dignity and honor her husband's final wish. Realizing she stood on the edge of ruin, Mrs. Turner suddenly changed her attitude completely. Her arrogance vanished, replaced by a pitiful, fabricated expression. She stepped toward Diana and tried to grab her hand. Fake tears pooled in her eyes as her voice trembled.
She begged, claiming she had lost control because of grief. She insisted she hadn't truly meant to drive Deanna away. She played the family card, saying they were still family and this shouldn't be resolved so cruelly. She even dared to say Ryan would be heartbroken to see his mother abandoned on the streets. Deanna stepped back, avoiding Mrs. Turner's touch, a firm, symbolic rejection. She looked straight into her mother-in-law's eyes and spoke in a low but piercing voice. "Where was this idea of family when you threw my belongings out? Where was your love when you turned off the stove and screamed at me in the kitchen?" Deanna stated firmly that she was not a storage place, used when needed and discarded when inconvenient. Her patience had run out. She had given Mrs. Turner years to change, but kindness had always been repaid with poison. Harry cut through the drama, glancing at his watch. He reminded them that time was running. 10 minutes had already been used for reading the will. Only 20 minutes remained for Mrs. Turner and Bella to pack their belongings. Harry stated coldly that if they weren't out within 20 minutes, he would call private security officers to carry out a forced eviction. The threat was deadly serious. Harry wasn't bluffing. He was a legal executor who followed through without exception. Mrs. Turner broke down hysterically, this time driven by fear and desperation. She dropped to her knees on the terrace, trying to cling to Deanna's legs and beg for mercy. The scene was painfully ironic. The woman who had stood like a conquering general the day before now knelt before the daughter-in-law she once despised. But Deanna's heart was closed to theatrics. She looked toward the garden where flowers had begun to bloom. She remembered Ryan's last words, telling her to be strong and defend herself if his mother crossed the line. Deanna knew that if she relented now, Mrs. Turner would trample her again in the future. The cycle had to end today, for her own peace and for Ryan's. Deanna signaled Harry to proceed as planned. She didn't say another word to Mrs. Turner, who continued sobbing on the floor. The decision was final. Ryan's will was the highest law. A violation had occurred, and consequences must follow. No negotiation, no bargaining. Deanna walked back into the house, stepping past Mrs. Turner's kneeling body, heading toward the living room to ensure everything proceeded smoothly. Her steps were firm, leaving behind a painful past. Before Mrs. Turner could even rise from her humiliating position, a silver van pulled into the driveway, parking beside Deanna's sedan. 4 people stepped out, 3 men and 1 woman, wearing neat gray uniforms.
They had the kind of faces that could not be joked with or bribed. They were an independent audit team Deanna had hired a week earlier, but only instructed to move this morning. Bella, who was still standing stiffly near the doorway, stared at the newcomers with confusion and growing anxiety. A bad feeling crept along her spine. She whispered nervously, asking anyone who might hear her who these people were and what they wanted. Deanna, already standing in the living room, welcomed the audit team and invited them to sit at the long, solid oak dining table. Without wasting any time, the auditors opened their laptops, laid out stacks of bank statements, and began working at remarkable speed. The sound of keyboards filled the room, creating a new rhythm of tension, different from before, but no less oppressive. Deanna then called Mrs. Turner and Bella to come inside. She did not invite them to sit, letting them stand instead, like defendants before a judge. Calmly, Deanna explained that while she had remained silent in the kitchen yesterday, and even for months while enduring passive-aggressive remarks, she had been observing everything. She knew the monthly household allowance she provided often ran out long before it should have. She also knew that small items in the house frequently went missing.
However, Diana refused to accuse anyone without proof. That was why she had hired the auditors to trace household cash flow and Ryan's assets, which Mrs. Turner had been granted access to under the guise of operational expenses. One of the auditors, a man with thick glasses, looked up and began reading their preliminary findings. The first discovery struck Bella like a slap. The auditor presented digital transaction data showing that Bella had routinely taken household cash stored in the kitchen drawer. The amounts seemed small per incident, around $5 to $15, but it had happened almost daily over the past 2 years. When totaled, the amount reached tens of thousands of dollars. The money had been used for mobile credit, skincare products, trendy cafe visits, and movie tickets. Transfer receipts and footage from hidden CCTV cameras Diana had installed in the kitchen area were displayed clearly on the laptop screen facing them. Bella's face burned red with shame and fear. She tried to defend herself in a weak, squeaking voice, saying it was just petty cash and that she was Ryan's younger sister, so it was natural for her to take money. Diana cut her off sharply. "Asking and stealing are two very different things," she said coldly. "Ryan always gave you an official allowance, but you still felt it wasn't enough and chose to steal from the household funds meant for daily meals." Diana stated bluntly that Bella's actions constituted domestic theft, and the CCTV footage alone was sufficient to send her to the police station if Diana chose to pursue it. Bella fell completely silent. Cold sweat trickled down her temples. But the real shock was not Bella. It was Mrs. Turner. A female auditor took over, pulling out a thick file containing debt records. A shocking truth was revealed. Mrs. Turner had accumulated massive debts in multiple places, from fraudulent savings schemes promising absurd returns to loans from predatory lenders. All this time, Mrs. Turner had maintained a luxurious lifestyle in front of her socialite friends, treating them to expensive dinners and buying high-end fabrics, entirely funded by borrowed money. She had always assumed she could pay it off later by asking Ryan or Diana for money. But the endless cycle of borrowing to cover previous debts had turned into a financial abyss. The peak of the findings was a credit agreement with an illegal lending cooperative. Ryan's name appeared on the document as the guarantor. The auditor handed the original document to Diana. Diana studied the signature and slowly shook her head. She knew her husband's handwriting intimately. The signature looked similar, but there was hesitation in the stroke. The auditor confirmed Diana's suspicion. A handwriting forensic team had verified that the signature was forged. Mrs. Turner had forged her own son's signature while Ryan was still alive during a period when he was gravely ill to secure a large loan to cover her newly uncovered gambling debts. The room fell dead silence. Mrs. Turner's breathing became heavy and uneven. She had been caught red-handed. Her previously piteous expression drained into a corpse-like pallor. Forgery was no longer a family matter. It was a criminal offense. Harry, the attorney, added coldly that forging a signature for financial gain could result in several years of prison time. He asked Diana whether she wanted to proceed immediately with criminal charges, as the evidence was complete and indisputable. Mrs. Turner began trembling violently. Her legs gave out and she collapsed into a dining chair. She had never imagined her lies would be exposed in such detail. All this time, she had believed Diana was a foolish woman who only knew how to cook and manage a household. She never realized that behind her silence was the sharp intelligence and meticulous nature of a seasoned businesswoman, traits inherited from her father, a prominent figure within the Grant family, a powerful Western-style property empire. Mrs. Turner now understood that she wasn't just being evicted, she was facing the possibility of spending her old age behind cold prison bars. The thought shattered her completely. Bella, upon hearing the word prison, erupted in hysterics. She screamed, blaming her mother. She shouted that Mrs. Turner had ordered her to take money from the kitchen drawer and taught her that luxurious living was a necessity. A vicious argument exploded between mother and daughter, right in front of Diana and the auditors. They accused each other, exposed each other's secrets, desperately trying to save themselves. The scene was both pitiful and revolting. Diana watched them with a flat expression, disgusted by the endless family drama. She raised her hand, demanding silence. She said she had one final offer. The choice was theirs. Leave immediately with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the matter would be closed. Or stay and the police would arrive within 5 minutes to arrest them both on charges of theft and document forgery. Her words hung in the air like the sword of Damocles. For Mrs. Turner and Bella, both options were terrifying, but the image of cold prison bars, thin mattresses, and institutional food was far more horrifying than homelessness. Tension in the dining room boiled over. Bella's fear transformed into rage. Survival instincts kicked in, and tragically, her target became her own mother. Bella shot to her feet, the chair screeching loudly against the floor. She pointed a trembling finger at Mrs. Turner and screamed that every scheme to seize Ryan's assets and drive Diana out had come from her mother. She shouted that she had only followed along because she was forced and promised an easy life. She screamed that she was still young and refused to let her future rot in prison because of her mother's greed. Vile words poured from Bella's mouth, words no child should ever hurl at the woman who gave birth to her. Mrs. Turner recoiled, her heart shattering. She had spoiled Bella, fulfilled every demand, even drowning herself in debt to buy luxury brands so Bella wouldn't fall behind her peers. And this was her reward? Furious, Mrs. Turner screamed back, reminding Bella who begged for an expensive designer bag just last week, who demanded monthly cosmetic treatments. She shouted that Bella was an ungrateful child who only knew how to take and now dared to bite the hand that fed her. The argument spiraled out of control. Their screaming echoed through the mansion walls and spilled into the quiet residential street outside. Neighbors stopped watering plants and walking dogs, curiosity drawing them toward the mansion gates. Whispering spread as they wondered what could possibly be happening inside the once admired household. Moments later, the wail of police sirens approached, drawing an even larger crowd. Harry had already contacted the police earlier as a precaution, anticipating escalation. When a patrol car with flashing blue lights stopped at the gate, the argument ceased instantly. Both Mrs. Turner and Bella turned deathly pale. 2 uniformed police officers entered the property, accompanied by the Homeowners Association president, who had rushed over after receiving disturbance reports. Harry greeted them at the doorway and escorted them inside. The presence of law enforcement instantly transformed the atmosphere. For years, Mrs. Turner had told everyone that she was the victim, that Diana was the cruel, stingy, ill-mannered daughter-in-law. The truth, however, turned out to be the complete opposite, a full 180 degrees. The neighbors' whispers quickly turned into open mockery. Harsh voices echoed from the open front door.
Some commented that it finally made sense why Mrs. Turner had lived such a luxurious lifestyle despite having no clear source of income. Others sneered at Bella, who had pretended to be wealthy while actually stealing money from her own brother. The carefully crafted reputation Mrs. Turner had built as a mistreated, long-suffering mother-in-law collapsed in an instant. She now stood exposed before the harsh judgment of society. The shame she felt was far more painful than any physical slap. She lowered her head deeply, unable to meet the eyes of the neighbors she once gossiped with so proudly. One of the police officers then asked Deanna, as the reporting party and legal homeowner, whether she wanted the case to proceed to formal criminal investigation or if she preferred an alternative resolution. The officers were fully prepared to handcuff Mrs. Turner and Della immediately. The preliminary evidence was more than sufficient. Hearing this, Bella dropped to her knees at Diana's feet, abandoning all dignity. She sobbed uncontrollably, begging for mercy, promising to disappear forever as long as she would not be sent to prison. With what little strength she had left, Mrs. Turner also pleaded in a hoarse voice. She knew this was the end. There were no cards left to play. Diana took a deep breath, looking down at the two women now kneeling helplessly before her. A flicker of pity crossed her heart, but she extinguished it with reason. This had gone too far. Still, Diana did not want to stain her hands by imprisoning her late husband's mother. She did not want Ryan's spirit to suffer seeing his own mother behind bars. Facing the police, she spoke clearly and firmly, loud enough for everyone to hear, including the neighbors outside. She decided not to pursue criminal charges today under one absolute condition. They had to leave the house immediately without taking a single valuable item purchased with Ryan's money or obtained through illegal means. They were allowed to take only the clothes they were wearing and a few old spare outfits Diana had already prepared. Diana's decision made both Bella and Mrs. Turner exhale in relief, as if they had just passed through the eye of a needle. Though they were losing everything and facing homelessness, at least they still had their freedom. The police nodded, respecting Diana's decision as the victim. However, they warned that all records of the crimes would remain on file. If either of them ever caused trouble again, legal proceedings would resume immediately without mercy. Harry then ordered them to stand up and leave. The negotiation was over. The eviction was now in execution phase. Diana walked toward the front door, followed by Harry and the police. Behind them, Mrs. Turner and Bella staggered forward, their steps heavy and unsteady. As they stepped onto the terrace, the neighbors' stares pierced them like thousands of needles. There was no sympathy, only disgust and judgment. Mrs. Turner, who once walked with her chin held high, now hunched forward trying to hide her face. Bella cried continuously, covering her face with her hands. This was instant karma at its most brutal. They were being expelled from a paradise they thought belonged to them, witnessed by the very people they once boasted to. Diana stood beside a pillar, arms crossed, watching the parasites leave. A slow sense of relief filled her chest as the crushing burden on her shoulders lifted with each step her mother-in-law and sister-in-law took away from her home. The eviction proceeded quickly, but for Mrs. Turner, it felt like torture. Under the strict supervision of two security officers Harry had summoned and the watchful eyes of the police, Mrs. Turner and Bella were escorted back to their rooms to collect a change of clothes. They were not allowed to bring suitcases. Instead, Diana had prepared two large, cheap, woven plastic shopping bags, the kind used for grocery markets, and placed them on the bed. Inside were a few old clothes they had worn years ago when they first came to live off Ryan. All branded clothing, party dresses, and expensive leather jackets they had acquired later were confiscated and left hanging neatly in the wardrobe.
Bella protested when she saw the cheap plastic bags, feeling humiliated. But one sharp glance from Harry was enough to shut her mouth. Security officers thoroughly checked their pockets and clothing to ensure they were not smuggling spare keys, Diana's cash, or small jewelry. The inspection was deeply degrading, but they had no choice. Every time Bella tried to hide a luxury perfume bottle under her clothes, the officer calmly removed it and placed it back on the vanity. "That doesn't belong to you," he said flatly. After the body check, they were escorted to the living room one last time. Mrs. Turner's eyes swept over the luxurious space with hollow despair. The soft Italian leather sofa where she used to spend her days watching TV, the sparkling crystal chandelier, the expensive paintings on the walls. Her heart ached as she realized she would never enjoy this comfort again. She was returning to the harsh life she had always despised. Her steps slowed near a sideboard in the living room, her eyes fixed on a beautiful bohemian crystal jar, her favorite item, one she often showed off to guests. Almost instinctively, her hand reached out for it. She thought at the very least she should take one valuable object she could sell to survive the next few days. She clutched it tightly to her chest like a lifebuoy. Before she could take another step, Diana's voice rang out cold and firm behind her. "Put it down. That's a gift from my father. It's not Ryan's, and certainly not yours." The voice was not loud, but its authority was absolute. Mrs. Turner turned, pleading with her eyes for one last mercy. "Just this, Diana. Let me take this as a keepsake," she whimpered. Diana shook her head slowly. She would not allow a single dollar of her assets to be taken by someone who had stolen from her for years. "Put it down," Diana said calmly, "or I will ask the police to come back in and add another theft charge." With trembling hands and a burning heart, Mrs. Turner placed the crystal jar back where it belonged. The sound of glass touching wood echoed sharply like the final gavel striking down her last hope. At last, the two women walked out through the main door. Diana followed them to the terrace. Outside, the sky, once clear, had turned dark and heavy. Black clouds rolled low as if mirroring the drama that had unfolded inside the house. Strong winds blew dust and dry leaves across the yard, casting a grim atmosphere. Most neighbors began to disperse, afraid of the impending rain, though a few still watched from behind their windows, eager to witness the final fall down of the cruel mother-in-law. Mrs. Turner and Bella trudged across the manicured lawn. Every step felt like lead weights dragging them down. At the tall iron gate stood Mr. James, the security guard Mrs. Turner used to scold over trivial matters. He now stood straight, holding the remote for the automatic gate. His face was neutral, but there was quiet satisfaction in his eyes. He pressed the button. The gate opened slowly with a low, mechanical hum. They stepped out onto the rough asphalt of the public road. The moment they crossed the boundary, Mr. James pressed the button again. Boom! The iron gate slammed shut and locked with a final, unmistakable sound. Mrs. Turner turned back, gripping the cold iron bars. She stared inside, at Diana, still standing on the warm, brightly lit terrace. The distance between them was no longer just the front yard, it was a vast gulf of fate. Diana did not wave. She simply turned and walked back into the house, closing the main door firmly behind her. The terrace lights went out, leaving Mrs. Turner and Bella in darkness. At that exact moment, rain began to pour, first lightly, then violently. A storm poured down without mercy. They had no umbrella, no shelter. Within seconds, their clothes were soaked. Bella shivered uncontrollably, tears mixed with rain as she frantically searched her pocket and pulled out an ATM card she had secretly hidden, their last hope.
She ran toward an ATM at a nearby convenience store. Mrs. Turner followed, struggling. Inside the cramped ATM booth, her hands shaking from cold, she entered the card and entered the PIN. The screen displayed a message that made her heart stop. Transaction declined. Your card has been blocked. Contact your issuing bank. She tried again and again. Same result. Deanna had kept her word. Every financial access linked to Ryan's assets had been. The tears of the sky could not wash away regret that arrived too late. That night became the longest and coldest night of their lives. Time moved swiftly, almost unnoticed. 2 months had passed since the dramatic eviction in the middle of a violent storm. The luxury house that once stood as a silent witness to Diana's suffering had completely transformed. The atmosphere inside now felt brighter, more open, alive, and breathing again. Diana decided to renovate several parts of the house, especially the kitchen, the very place where her trauma had taken root. The once dark and rigid space was turned into a modern kitchen dominated by large glass windows that allowed the morning sunlight to flood in freely. There were no longer shadows of fear or a lingering sense of unease while cooking. Diana could now stand there peacefully, enjoying every moment without screams or cruel remarks piercing her ears. Diana also reclaimed her true identity as a strong, accomplished career woman. She no longer hid who she was. Every morning, the Grant Group, the real estate corporation owned by her father, arrived to pick her up. Diana led high-level meetings, made strategic decisions, and oversaw skyscraper development projects. Her employees respected her not because she was the owner's daughter, but because of her intelligence, integrity, and firm leadership. Amidst her busy schedule, Diana continued to fulfill the last wish of her late husband, Ryan. She turned the side pavilion of her house into a temporary residence for underprivileged yet high-achieving college students from out of town. Laughter and intellectual discussions now filled the once silent house, replacing the toxic aura left behind by her former mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Diana felt her life had regained meaning and purpose. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, fate turned sharply in the opposite direction. In a densely populated neighborhood with narrow, muddy alleys and the stench of open sewers, Mrs. Turner and Bella began their miserable new lives. They lived in a tiny rented room measuring barely 3 by 3 meters. The walls were damp with peeling paint, the roof leaked whenever it rained, and the air felt suffocating due to poor ventilation. There were no plush mattresses or air conditioning anymore. They slept pressed together on a thin foam mattress that had long lost its shape, accompanied by the constant noise of neighbors fighting and babies crying through the flimsy plywood walls. That morning, the cramped room felt unbearably hot, matching the bitterness in their hearts. Mrs. Turner lay weak on the mattress, her face pale, coughing dryly without relief. She had lost significant weight due to poor nutrition and prolonged stress. The expensive medications she once took to maintain her health and beauty were now distant memories. She relied solely on cheap, over-the-counter drugs that barely helped. In a hoarse voice, Mrs. Turner called out to Bella, asking for warm water and food. There was no gentle response like the service she once received in Diana's house. Bella sat in the corner, roughly folding other people's laundry. She now worked as a daily laundry laborer for neighbors just to survive. Her once manicured hands were now rough, cracked, and calloused from harsh detergents and endless scrubbing. Hearing her mother's complaints, Bella finally snapped. She threw the clothes she was holding onto the floor and screamed in frustration. She complained that she was tired of being the family's sole provider.
She complained that the money she earned that day was already gone to pay overdue electric bills and that they had no rice or food left for lunch. Mrs. Turner tried to calm her daughter, urging patience, but her words only fueled Bella's rage. Bella stood up and glared at her mother with hatred burning in her eyes. She blamed her mother for everything, saying that if her mother had not been greedy and obsessed with taking over Diana's house, they would still be sleeping in luxurious bedrooms and eating well every day. She accused her mother of dragging her into this pit of poverty. The argument ended with Bella slamming the door and storming out on an empty stomach, leaving Mrs. Turner sobbing alone in regret that had come too late. Bella wandered aimlessly through the dusty, sun-scorched streets until her feet led her to an elite business district in the heart of the city, where towering skyscrapers pierced the sky. Without realizing it, she stopped in front of a magnificent high-rise building with the Grant Group logo displayed prominently in the lobby. Bella knew this was the headquarters owned by the Grant family. Desperation and hunger pushed her towards a reckless thought. She planned to go inside and beg Diana for any job, cleaning staff, office assistant, anything, as long as it paid enough to escape the hell of that rented room. Gathering her courage, Bella stepped towards the automatic glass doors, but her movement was halted by a well-dressed security officer who looked her over suspiciously. Bella caught her reflection in the glass. A faded, worn-out t-shirt, dirty jeans, cheap flip-flops, dull hair, and an oily, makeup-free face. She stood in stark contrast to the polished executives walking confidently through the lobby. At that moment, the private executive elevator opened. A group of people stepped out, and in the center of them was Diana. Diana looked absolutely radiant. She wore an elegant formal business suit, walking with confidence while listening to reports from her assistant. Everyone in the lobby bowed respectfully as she passed. She looked powerful, brilliant, and untouchable. Bella felt herself shrink. A crushing sense of inferiority slammed into her chest. She realized the distance between herself and Diana was now as vast as earth and sky. She felt like a speck of dirt, unworthy of standing in such a pristine place. Her courage vanished instantly. Bella did not enter. She didn't even dare to call Diana's name. Overwhelmed with shame, she turned around and ran away from the magnificent building, running as fast as she could while holding back tears. She finally understood that the door of opportunity had closed the moment she and her mother chose cruelty. Diana was no longer a sister-in-law to exploit. Diana was now a powerful stranger at the peak of success, while she herself had fallen into the abyss through her own actions. Bella returned to the rented room empty-handed, her heart even more shattered, realizing tomorrow might be darker than today. The late afternoon sun cast a gentle glow over the green grass of a peaceful public cemetery. Diana knelt beside a well-maintained grave with clean soil. On the black marble headstone was engraved the name Ryan, her beloved husband. Diana scattered fresh rose petals over the grave and gently poured rose water, casting the stone as if touching Ryan's face. There were no excessive tears on her cheeks, only calm acceptance and a quiet, enduring longing. She spoke softly as if Ryan could hear her. She told him about the house now filled with students' laughter, about the company thriving under her leadership, and how much lighter her heart felt. She whispered that she had fulfilled her last duty, protecting her dignity and honoring Ryan's trust. She admitted she had forgiven Mrs. Turner and Bella in her heart for her own peace, but she could not forget what they had done. She had surrendered their fate entirely to natural law and divine justice. After praying quietly, Diana stood up, adjusted her clothes, exhaled deeply, and walked away from the cemetery. Her personal driver opened the back door of a luxury sedan waiting at the gate. Diana sat inside the cool, fragrant cabin, leaning back against the leather seat as the car emerged into the city's evening traffic. At a busy red light, the car stopped. Diana gazed out through the tinted window, watching the chaotic streets, street vendors, impatient motorcyclists, and passing crowds. Suddenly, her heart skipped. On the sidewalk in front of a small roadside food stall, an elderly woman sat on a low stool washing a towering pile of dirty dishes. She wore a torn, worn-out dress, her gray hair tied carelessly. Her body was frail and bony, her skin darkened by the sun. Her hands trembled as she worked slowly, occasionally stopping to rub her aching waist or wipe sweat from her face. The stall owner, a large man, shouted at her impatiently, scolding her for being too slow. The old woman only bowed her head in silence, completely stripped of dignity. Diana recognized her instantly. Despite the drastic change, there was no mistaking her former mother-in-law. It was Mrs. Turner, once adorned in gold jewelry, playing the role of a high society lady, looking down on others. Now she was a dishwasher at a roadside stall, scraping leftovers just to survive. By chance, as Mrs. Turner lifted her face to reach for a bar of dish soap, her gaze fell upon a luxury sedan stopped right in front of the food stall where she worked. Although the car's windows were heavily tinted, somehow, through a mother's instinct or perhaps the weight of guilt that had haunted her for so long, Mrs. Turner could sense who was inside. Her eyes widened, her lips parted slightly. She froze mid-wash. Her hands, still covered in soap suds, trembled violently as she stared at the rear window of the car, as if hoping it would roll down and Diana would call her home. There was a desperate plea in her eyes, the look of someone drowning, begging a passing ship for rescue. Diana saw that look, and for a brief moment her heart wavered. Her humanity urged her to step out, to give the old woman some money or at least buy her a warm meal. But memories flooded back. Mrs. Turner's cruelty, her vicious slander, the heartless eviction when Diana was still grieving, and above all, Ryan's final wishes. Diana realized that if she intervened now, this life lesson would never truly be completed. If she helped Mrs. Turner at this moment, the woman would once again become a parasite, entitled, unrepentant, and potentially harmful to others in the future. Ryan wanted his mother to learn how to stand on her own feet and to understand the consequences of greed. The driver, noticing Diana's unusual silence through the rearview mirror, asked gently, "Would you like me to stop for a moment, ma'am, or give something to the beggar outside?" The question pulled Diana out of her thoughts. She closed her eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and steadied her resolve. When she opened her eyes, she stared straight ahead, deliberately avoiding eye contact with the old woman on the sidewalk. In a calm but firm voice, Diana replied, "No, thank you. Just keep driving. The light is green." The luxury sedan moved forward, slowly leaving the intersection behind, leaving Mrs. Turner standing there, motionless, watching the exhaust fumes of her daughter-in-law's car fade into the distance. In that moment, Mrs. Turner understood. That had been her last chance, and she had lost it. She realized that the doors of forgiveness and luxury were now closed to her forever. Tears fell from her eyes into the murky basin of soapy water, mixing with food scraps and grease. She lowered her head once more and resumed scrubbing the dishes, swallowing the bitter pill of regret she would have to live with for the rest of her life. Inside the moving car, Diana leaned back against the seat, gazing at the evening sky as it slowly turned shades of gold and amber. She felt relieved. She did not feel cruel. She had simply been fair, fair to herself and fair to her late husband. A faint smile curved her lips. It was the smile of a woman who had survived life's fiercest storms with her head held high. In her heart, she whispered a closing line for this chapter of her life. Silence does not mean weakness, and letting go does not mean defeat. Silence is sometimes the strongest way to let the universe do its work, to reveal who is right and who is wrong. Diana's car continued forward, driving toward the horizon, welcoming a future bright with hope, leaving the darkness of the past far behind.